So like, about a year ago, I made this video, the finale of my series of videos taking a closer look at RWBY's villains, meant to touch on the fact that the show has a protagonist-centered morality. However, for one brief moment in this video, I have this pop up on screen. Why is it only a text blurb on the screen? Well, in my larger point to make, I was addressing the moments the heroes' actions aren't very good morally, or at least are on par with some of the actions the villains have done. But in the grand scheme of the video, I sort of forgot to include this tidbit with Tyrion's tale, mostly because it doesn't really coincide with the idea of my discussion topic. While I personally don't think RWBY should have cut off Tyrion's tail, it wasn't a morally bad thing for her to do, so I figured I'd just throw it into the vid like this to address the topic, but I didn't need to bother going into further detail on the idea because it wasn't accurate to the rest of the video's discussion. However, recently, this discussion point has suddenly caused a bit of a stir in the fandom, and everyone keeps equating this take to me, even though I'm sure people have made this point before me, and I felt like it was weird to have this discussion stapled to my name without actually having fully discussed the topic in detail in an actual video. So I figured if everyone's going to discuss it, I'll actually address the point properly. First of all, like I said, I don't think RWBY was morally wrong for defending herself. The main issue I have is, I think from a character point of view, I don't think RWBY would be comfortable with cutting off someone's limb, even in an act of self-defense. At the time, I questioned if any of them would be in the right for doing something like this, but as time went on, I feel like it's really only true in terms of RWBY, though I also think Jean, Ren, and Nora might be a little queasy at the idea of chopping limbs off. Crow, I don't think would have much of a problem with it, at least from like a character personality point of view, you know? But yeah, in terms of like the larger umbrella of this situation, if it was Jean, Ren, or Nora, or Crow, I wouldn't have as much of an issue with it. It's specifically because RWBY just saw how her sister had lost a limb and how hard that impacted her emotionally. On a similar note, RWBY had also seen one of her closest friends, Penny, become ripped apart limb by limb. So to specifically RWBY Rose, I think the act of taking off a person's limb would be something she wouldn't be thrilled to do. And to the people bringing up the argument of, well, she had no other choices in the moment. No, she didn't, but you know who did? The writers. I always laugh whenever people discuss the actions of RWBY as if it's reality. Oh, hindsight's 20/20. Well, in the heat of war, blah 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 blah. That's all irrelevant. This isn't real. RWBY is not reality. These characters are not real people. These actions are not real actions. This is a cartoon, written by two people. Miles and Carrie sat down, wrote out this episode script, went back, revised it, sent it off to an executive, had them make sure everything looked the way they wanted it to, and then sent the script off to get animated. The writers could have written the train of events to go a million different ways. So the fact they chose to have RWBY dismember her opponent was not some unforeseen act of fate. She had no other choices. There was nothing else anyone could have done. No, the writers. The writers chose these actions, okay? I think it's rather tactless to have RWBY dismember someone given the events she's seen from her closest friends and family, and I really don't want to bother arguing pointless what-if-isms. Sure, we could argue endlessly about what else could RWBY have done, what else would Tyrian have been able to block, could someone else have done something, blah 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 blah. Listen, we could argue endless hypotheticals, and I'm certain the comment section of this video will be full of that already. No, I don't want to bother discussing the actual act itself, because I think the much more interesting topic would be RWBY's response to her actions afterwards, because regardless of whatever anyone says, she does cut off Tyrion's tail. And that should be really interesting to RWBY Rose herself to grapple with. Yeah, she chopped off a man's limb, and I think that should sort of rattle her a bit. At the very least, I think it should cause her some introspection. And you wanna know why? Because that would make her so interesting. You know the complaint me and many others have about the show? How it's a lot of people sitting around talking, but they never actually feel like they interact with each other? If the characters addressed themselves and their own actions, their own worries, have an ounce of hindsight about the things they do and say, then that would help fix that complaint. Could you imagine? Rather than just sitting around explaining things we saw on screen with zero reactions from the others, what if instead RWBY had to address the fact she hurt a man? Seeing Yang showing off her robotic arm, RWBY would bring it up, question if she's no better than Adam, worried Yang would be angry with her for doing this. Would Ren and Nora insist she's not the same as Adam because of the circumstances, trying to make her feel better? Would Yang be worried about the idea of Tyrian also getting a robotic limb with souped up enhancements just like she did? Would Jean and Crow reflect on how she or any of them could have done something different so she wouldn't be questioning this? In short, wouldn't it be so interesting if all the things me and the internet have been discussing about this event was something the actual characters in universe were saying? I don't want to have this conversation with some rando person on Twitter. I want Ruby Rose to be having this conversation with her friends and family. That is what should make this event all so interesting. Regardless of the act itself, it's the character's reaction to that act that should be the real center of the discussion. Quite frankly, a lot of the things I discuss in that video would be vastly more interesting if the characters had a single shred of hindsight and introspection to the things they do, because that is what would really make them different than the villains. Bad guys don't question their actions. When they do, that usually means they're on the path that leads to redemption for them, like Emerald. When the heroes don't question their actions or strive to do the right thing, try to follow the correct path, either legally or morally, then we have to start questioning whether or not they're even really heroes at that point. And importantly, RWBY as a show is not one that's trying to present its main characters as anti-heroes, morally gray vigilantes. Quite the opposite. The several morally gray characters we've had have been condemned as villains by Team RWBY. Team RWBY don't bother looking at Ironwood's morally questionable decisions. He's a villain. But why is it different when it comes to their own morally questionable decisions? That's what makes it hard to take them seriously, seeing how often they villainize others for doing something, but excuse themselves when they do it too. So yeah, long story short, I think RWBY would be a much more interesting character if she had more introspection to her actions. If the actual characters cared enough about the things that they do to discuss them the same way the internet discusses them. But unfortunately, this whole topic is a bit of a worthless endeavor. All this has done is exemplify how the internet will argue with each other over something that the show clearly doesn't care enough about to bother addressing. And it's sad just how often that's the case. Shout out to my $10 patrons, you're all amazing. Nako, James Dodds, Cool Duck, Andrew, Ramiel, Valhalla Knight, Chamomile, Classy Critic, Sunny Shy, Azoth, Great Bar, Jake, Amber, Hype Man, Zero to Hero, Joseph, Scaring Crows, Not All That Evil, Messiah, Jacob, Virus, and Ben's Sketchbook. So yeah, I just wanted to, address the topic. If people are gonna keep talking about it and keep saying it's from me, I was like, I guess I'll explain myself properly. So yeah, I hope, please be nice in the comments, please. I know for some reason this has weirdly caused a lot of arguments in the fandom, which really shows how little, empathy a lot of you have. So yeah, please be civil, please be nice. This is such a minor thing to be upset about anyway. So yeah, leave your thoughts and opinions in the comments. I'll see you in the next one. Bye bye.